Wow, we have Toronto, Brooklyn, UK, Sierra Leone, Wisconsin, Boston, South Africa, India. El Salvador. Welcome, welcome everyone. All right, let's get started because we have a lot of content to go through. So we want to give enough time for it and for you to ask any questions at the end. We will try to leave 10, 15 minutes at the end for you to ask any questions. If you have questions throughout the process, you can also ask them in the Q&A section. Try to not ask them in the chat because sometimes with all the messages and comments from people, they can get lost. But you can either put it in the Q&A or raise your hand and we'll address it at the end. Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Lorena Rodriguez. Some of you who have joined previous webinars might know me. I'm a co-founder at Sopact, and I am also in charge of the customer success team. And today, Unmesh couldn't be with us because of a personal issue, but we have me, and we also have Spencer, who is here from Kiva to talk about the inconsistencies in reporting and impact measurement from between funders and entrepreneurs, which is something that we have talked about previously. And you already know that it's something that is happening. So Kiva, in case you don't know this organization, Kiva.org is a crowdfunding website that provides loans for small businesses and social enterprises worldwide and collects detailed information on the social impact practices of organizations that apply for funding. And then data from this, organization, Kiva.org, created recently a survey or did a survey. And Spencer McCall, Director of Impact at Kiva, is here to talk about that survey. In this survey, he has some findings that he wants to share with us about what kind of impact is measured by the social enterprises and nonprofits, and what is the misalignment with the expectations from the funders or the kind of information that they request from these organizations to provide funds, whether it is as grants or investment. So welcome, Spencer. Feel free to give a better introduction than what I did, and feel free to start.
Thank you so much, Lorena. Very happy to be here. Thank you all for joining this webinar from all over the world. It's really exciting to see so many of you just from other parts of the globe. I'm calling in from Seattle, Washington, and yeah, I'm excited to jump into this presentation called The Evidence Gap in Impact Investing and what investors and social enterprises can do about it. So, today we're really going to be talking about why we care about impact measurement, and I'm going to be sharing the results of an application survey that we've had over a number of years at Kiva, where we asked social enterprises and microfinance institutions to describe the way that they're measuring their impact. I'm going to be sharing what that current state and current practice looks like from hundreds of social enterprises and microfinance institutions, and kind of describe what that gap is and how we can all work together to kind of narrow that evidence gap. Before I jump in, I want to give a little bit more of a brief introduction about Kiva.org. You can go to that website. We like to call ourselves the world's first crowdfunding site for good. It started in 2005. You can browse our site and look for and support many small businesses in over 70 countries. To date, we've actually supported over 4.5 million borrowers, deployed over almost $2 billion. And we've done this by crowdfunding money through over 2 million lenders from around the world. So it's a great way to kind of get involved in impact investing for just $25. In addition to that Kiva.org product, we've also launched 3 other products that I want to talk about real quick. One is Kiva Labs, which is providing direct financing and debt capital to social enterprises that are tackling some of the world's toughest issues, averaging about $100,000 loans there, but up to $500,000 loans can be financed. We also have a Kiva US program where we can finance US small borrowers for 0% interest. And we also have Kiva Capital, which takes institutional capital to help drive more investment into microfinance and social enterprise organizations. All right, well, with that, I want to talk about the one laptop per child story. We're all here because we believe in the power of impact. We believe in the power of social entrepreneurship, innovative NGOs, and also coming from the impact investing sector, we believe that impact investing can really drive dollars to organizations that are making the world a better place. So we look at one laptop per child. They started in Uruguay, and their vision was to increase laptop ownership in Uruguay, increase internet access. And then by doing this, kids will be able to perform better in school and have an increased interest in STEM-focused careers. So if you think about this vision, it's very bold, it's inspiring, and it would attract a lot of investment and support. But without first testing and scaling, what is the proof, the evidence of that increased laptop ownership would increase educational attainment, you're kind of just left to use your gut instinct and say, yeah, this seems like this would work. And a study that came out found that yes, laptop ownership increased, internet access increased, but math scores and educational attainment in terms of the percentage of kids who are going on to higher education also didn't increase. And I think it was one study found that even STEM careers were lower for those that received laptops. Kind of a perplexing story, and there's a lot of confusion. That's not to say that we shouldn't be increasing laptop ownerships, but we should be doing it in an actively managed way, which is testing what happens after the student receives the computer. Are they using it to play games, or are they using it to study? Really understanding that theory of change and testing that theory ongoing. So that's kind of an illustration of just the difference between vision and evidence. And that's what I call the evidence gap. We have our social impact vision as impact entrepreneurs. What is our evidence? And the difference between those two is this gap. So again, we could be focusing on it's not just about the number of laptops, not just about the number of farmers that you serve as an organization. We're here because we care. We care about that ultimate change in income and financial resilience, improving crop yields. This is why we're here. So I like to first start about, what is impact measurement? Make sure we're all kind of on the same page, as everyone defines this differently, as well as defining what we mean by social entrepreneurship or impact investing. So in this case, I'm not talking about ESG investments. I'm not talking about kind of thematic investors. At Kiva, we really care about this group called Group C, and it's an ABC framework as defined by the Impact Management Project, which is really, we're trying to find institutions that are contributing to solutions, that are helping to tackle the malnutrition issues in Africa, or tackling the education gap. That's what I'm referring to in this presentation when I'm saying impact investments. It's investing in organizations that are really trying to make a measurable change with their solutions. When we say impact measurement, this is also a term that's been thrown around a lot. The true definition of impact is the change in an outcome experienced by a stakeholder that is caused by a program's products or services. So really emphasize that word caused and that change. You can always think about it as what would have happened had this customer not received our products and services. And that's called the counterfactual. So this graph on the bottom left illustrates that counterfactual state. The blue line is kind of, let's say it's income. Let's say it's a small business owner. So the small business is going to have slightly increased income throughout their time. However, right in the middle, we have that intervention. This could be your business coming to help them out with a training program or a loan that's happening. So when that happens, we see a change in their income. It deviates from what would have happened had they just continued with their normal small business. So measuring this change is super interesting, super fascinating, and challenging. But really, this is what we're trying to understand, is what is the counterfactual difference between what your company does compared to what would have happened had your company not been there. So we look at our toolkit as impact evaluation practitioners. We call ourselves, we have this impact toolkit. And I think there's a little bit of a myth that if you can't get to these tools on the bottom, which are higher cost, they can be complex to implement, yet they have a very strong kind of causal link, then we shouldn't try at all. And that's not the message that we need to be hearing. It's that there are other tools that we can use to at least get started. We hear a lot about social enterprises that think that, oh, impact measurement is this huge, this big task we can't tackle. But if you think about any sort of general business, any business talks to their customers, ask them, how they like their products, if they're satisfied. We can start there. It's lower cost, it's simpler to implement. There definitely is a weaker causal link, but we want to get some evidence that what you're doing is having the right intended effect for your intended stakeholders. I don't want to maybe go into too much detail here, but if for those that are really interested in the higher cost kind of complex studies, the quasi-experimental studies, this presentation won't go into a lot of detail there. JPAL has a great online course about measuring social impact. There's a lot of resources on the World Bank's impact measurement websites. A lot of great kind of focus areas if you want to go really deep on these methods. To talk about that first bucket of your toolkit, how can we just ask general questions to get some understanding of our impact? Vision Fund Kenya conducted this lean data study with 60 decibels, which is a representative sample. They call 250 customers, which is a representative picture of all of their customers, and they find what their net promoter score is. So great, they kind of have one rung on the impact evidence ladder. Their customers are happy with their loans. They feel that they also couldn't find a good alternative to Vision Fund Kenya's loans. If you go down to the bottom third of this picture, you can see 91% reported an improved quality of life because of Vision Fund's loans. So you kind of get a little bit of that attribution there. What would have happened had you not received this loan? So this is great. This is all climbing that evidence ladder, and you're not having to do a rigorous experiment at the moment. Now, if we go to the experimental example, one that comes to mind is One Acre Fund, an amazing organization based in Kenya that has been working to provide training and loans to smallholder farmers, and they do rigorous experimental methods. They have an entire impact team that has done RCTs, has done something called a difference in difference model, which is a quasi-experimental model, and they can demonstrate that, yes, after one of their customers works with them, they increase their profits $59 a year. They can increase their maize production 287 kilograms per acre. Very specific, very strong impact evidence. But again, hard to do this for the vast majority of organizations. So I look at investors and investees, we have a lot in common, which is why I think narrowing this evidence gap is both of our responsibilities. In the middle, we both become more accountable to our mission. When our investees that we support can report back to us on the evidence that they're having, it helps us feel like we're accountable to our mission as well. We all learn from the impact insights from those reports, and it allows us to kind of optimize our products based on what we've learned. Now, investees also get business benefits. And so this is also important. Some people think that impact measurement is very far away from what the company does, but to push back on the argument, if you understand your customers better, if you understand if they are benefiting from your products, that your supply chain farmers are happier with the prices they're getting for their crops, you're going to have increased customer retention, likely improved customer satisfaction. This can help drive new innovation and products. And then ultimately, if you are looking for financing either through grants or through debt capital or equity capital, you're going to be differentiated from your competitors. You're going to be able to have a stronger kind of impact thesis. So it's really both of our responsibilities here. So now switching over to how social enterprises and MFIs, also known as microfinance institutions, are measuring and managing their social impact. Let's talk about what data I'm going to be pulling from today. So when an organization wants to receive financing from Kiva, they apply through an application survey. And as part of that application survey, we ask a lot of questions about what impact data they have and what their impact practices are. So if we go back to 2019 for some of our social enterprise data here, largely 2021 to 2022 in microfinance companies, we have over 200 organizations that we've received this data from MFIs, mostly in Africa and Latin America. And then for social enterprises, we have about 142 companies that we have reviewed their social impact indicators. So let's kind of talk a little bit about what we're noticing here. First, a couple of things stood out. I know there's a lot on this slide, but one is for lending institutions, we asked, do you have someone who's in charge of collecting social data? So that first bar chart says 60%. 60% of these institutions have at least this one person. So that means 40% don't have anyone really in charge of collecting social data. That's a gap there. We also see that still 72% of these lending institutions are relying on paper surveys. These can be really hard to then kind of do data entry, collect, analyze, particularly with the proliferation of kind of offline data tools. Still pretty surprised to see that 72% number. And then if we look kind of at how this data is being integrated, a lot of MFIs already have management information systems. But if we look at kind of CRM software like Salesforce, only 22% really are able to have more advanced kind of integrated data in terms of kind of quick analysis here. Now let's look at the type of kind of impact studies. So if we look at that, if we think back to Impact Toolkit again, what are we seeing here? First of all, 73% say they have done an impact study, or they collect impact data. That's decent. Of course, we'd want to get that to be 100%. But as we go through what methods they're using, the most common one is going to be customer satisfaction. Are you happy with the loans that you've received? Are you happy with the products and services? Case studies and talking to a focus group, talking to a few customers is going to be about 40% of the lending institutions that have been applying for financing. But if you really look at any quantitative outcome study, so this is just a representative sample, understanding through reliable data if their customers are reporting an improvement either by decreasing their poverty level or increasing their incomes, it's really 37%. And this is the number that I've really focused on in terms of the evidence gap. And then lastly, we look at that experimental academic study is at 5% of lending institutions. We learned traditionally what impact measurement is. It's about that counterfactual, but really that's not what enterprises are doing. They're not able to measure that. Now, if we look at our social enterprises specifically, that data set, we kind of see something similar. The core impact metrics that enterprises report on are people reached, jobs created, income change, CO2 reduction, crop yields. This is probably skewed towards Kiva's applicants who tend to be in agriculture and clean energy. But still, we see that there's not a lot that are focused on that change variable. If you have income change and crop yield changes, so maybe 25% are focused on those outcomes, and the rest are focused on outputs. And we ask kind of impact study methods. We see again, RCT studies are at the bottom 6%, and we see that having any sort of quantitative study is at 42%. So overall, I think we see that 60% of organizations are not having a quantitative study. But to call out one that is doing well, I want to just show, I always like to show examples. We have Cycle Connect is a great organization in Uganda. They do internal outcomes studies that they manage with their team. And they're able to demonstrate that they're increasing the income of their farmers' clients in income 30%. So this is great. We can move along that evidence ladder. Great job, Cycle Connect. So again, going back to this gap, it's really about 60%. And our mission as impact investors and all of us in social entrepreneurship is to narrow this gap. And really, it's about kind of moving along this evidence journey. This is an example of a typical enterprise that will be applying for financing for Kiva. We see a lot of organizations that are kind of in that first left bucket. They say that they work in low-income countries and they work with rural farmers. Therefore, kind of thematically, they're an impact organization. Maybe, maybe not. We don't really know if farmers are benefiting from this organization. Then we see the next step up. They say, okay, they pay above market prices. That's great to know that they're paying above a commodity price for coffee or above a commodity price for any type of agricultural input. But that also doesn't answer whether the farmers either were already receiving that above market price or whether they're a small percentage of their supplier, so they're not really receiving an improved income. Or whether even with that improved price, our farmers still making a livable wage. So then we see more coming out with farmers being able to report that they make more income. That's great. We're kind of climbing that impact evidence ladder. And then lastly, if they're able to compare incomes to a similar group of farmers during that same period, we kind of get farther up that ladder and narrow that evidence gap. So really thinking about how do we get organizations to kind of keep moving to the right here, keep thinking about what is the outcome effect that they're having. So to talk about how can we narrow this gap, I encourage you all to write comments, questions in the chat. How is your organization narrowing this gap? How are you able to prioritize evidence, prioritize outcome collection, and perhaps how impact investors can support you as well. So the first thing we need to do is understand the barriers. So we asked our organizations that were applying, what are some of the barriers that you're facing in measuring your impact? And the top cited barrier was too costly, and they require financing in order to, sorry, one moment. Let me just reshare my screen. They require financing in terms of measuring social impact. So that makes sense. A lot of folks think that this is quite expensive. Apologies for the delay. Okay. But again, going back to that first myth, folks think they have to do a kind of a $200,000 randomized controlled trial to measure impact. That's not where we're at. We're really just, can you start with understanding subjective changes over time? Difficulty to reach clients. We've heard a lot of folks talking about how they have customers that are in dead zones without mobile phone reception. How can they call them? They'd have to take a motorcycle up to go to reach these clients, or clients won't respond back to them. We see difficulty getting credible responses. Oftentimes, if you ask somebody specifically, what is the income you've earned, they won't know how to answer that in a reliable way. Or they might be intimidated by a loan officer, so might have bias in saying something positive. So organizations are sensitive to how do we get around this credibility issue? Similar to requiring funding, organizations talk about they don't have the right staff. So if they're focused on deploying loans, they have loan officers, but they don't have M&E professionals. Lack of efficient survey technology. I think there's a lot of growing technology out there, so it's interesting to see this still there, but most organizations are saying they don't have the right kind of questions and templates that they can use to really measure their impact. Lastly, the last one I want to call is difficult to attribute impact to the organization. That also is what I'm talking about, that counterfactual change. Organizations are aware that just because a customer says that their life is improving, how do they know that's because of what they've done? So it was great to hear some of those quotes. The good news is that organizations are eager to receive impact assistance. So we ask, of these particular buckets, how would you like to potentially collaborate with Kiva or some of our supporters? And we see that the number one request is help with customer impact measurement. All right. So we understand the barriers. Let's talk a little bit about how social enterprises can just start to improve their measurement today. And I've repeated this already, but it's worth again mentioning that just start with getting to know your customers. So that starts with customer experience surveys, customer satisfaction, understand your customers' needs, what issues are they facing. And you can really use this to start tailoring your products, tailoring your services to address the information that you're gathering from your clients. The second recommendation, look for ways to make data collection easier. This really fundamentally is a data issue. As we get better at collecting data and making that simpler, impact evaluation becomes a lot easier. If your stakeholders happen to be online, you can send surveys via email. You might be able to send survey links through their mobile phone or WhatsApp. You can look for ways to integrate your data collection into existing operations. So if you have a loan officer that's collecting loan application, they might be able to collect a few other kind of social indicators at that point in time. So you're not adding on additional kind of procedures. If you're working in offline environments, I recommend looking up ona.io or any sort of kind of ODK data collection tool. It's easy to download and put onto your mobile phone or a tablet, so you can collect data offline. Kind of looking at this in practice, our Kiva US team does work with borrowers that have access to the internet, and so it's a lot easier to collect impact data. We've set up kind of an automated, let us know how your business is doing, that automatically will send out outcome surveys at 6 months after that borrower has received their loan, so we can kind of get reliable outcome data ongoing. So one way that makes our life easier. Third, I would start then asking about subjective change in impacts experience. So has the money you earn from farming changed since working with this social enterprise? And then having kind of a Likert scale question. This gets a little bit at the attribution, because you're not saying, has your money increased in the last year? You're saying, has your money increased because of working with this organization? Then ask why they gave that answer. That can help get a little bit further down that path. And then lastly, looking at counterfactual. So what would have happened otherwise? To compare that counterfactual data, you can look at existing benchmarks. So look at local wage data where you're working. Look at local poverty rates. What are the comparable kind of commodity prices or agricultural practices in that area? Next, I would, if you can, it's really great to continue to run an experiment where some of your customers would randomly receive different versions of your product. This requires a lot of thoughtfulness, so don't jump into this too easily. There's been a lot of great examples where you can do this in a thoughtful way. If you have an online kind of experience, it's a lot easier to do this, kind of known as A/B testing, where there's tools out there where people that are logging into your website can see slightly different versions of your product. So you can then measure their click activity, something like that. Obviously, if you're working in a rural environment, it could be quite hard to run these experiments. Quasi-experimental techniques, there's one that I really like called a regression discontinuity. It's if you have some sort of cutoff in terms of eligibility for your program, you already have a great control group. You can measure the change that your customers are experiencing compared to your customers or users that were just below some sort of cutoff. And just one example of that looks like in the US, we decided to use this method. because we have a strict rule around an applicant's kind of total debt to income ratio. If it's above a certain threshold, unfortunately, this can't be eligible for the loans that we're distributing. So therefore, we have motivated similar types of borrowers that would like financing, but just because of this strict rule we have, will be not able to receive our financing. Therefore, we actually reached out to 100 of those kind of non-borrowers at Kiva, and we're able to directly measure, how have they been able to access financing? Is their company still operating? What is their confidence in a variety of manners? So it's a way of kind of us estimating that counterfactual. Switching over to the impact investors side, one approach that I think Kiva has been doing well is taking a tiered or scaled funding approach. And what I mean by this is drawing a line in the sand says, if you don't have this level of proof, you don't receive financing, I think is too black and white, is too narrow of thinking, because it really biases investment towards more well-funded, grant-funded organizations that are able to kind of produce this high-quality impact measurement reports. While we do want to reward organizations for doing that, we also don't want to be excluding companies just because they have just started their impact journey. Impact measurement is a journey, and we want to be supporting organizations on that. So one thing that we've done is we've allowed organizations to receive smaller amounts of financing through Kiva. And then as they evolve, as they change year over year, they can be eligible for higher amounts of financing. I like this approach. I think it makes a lot of sense for other investors as well. Also, let's just directly support impact studies. Let's help to improve impact measurement capacity. Investors have been doing a great job driving debt and equity financing, but there's more that enterprises need. And a lot of our organizations have told us, if we could get access to tablets, some software, some training, we could really start to collect more data. So we've launched a technical assistance fund at Kiva, where we've been able to help pay for some impact measurement studies. We've helped some organizations to advance their data collection processes. So I really want to encourage fund managers to go and fundraise for technical assistance grants, talk to your investors if they can support these grant initiatives, talk to philanthropic foundations, government organizations, because in order for us to move together as a sector, to get to that point where we feel like we really are generating valuable evidence, we need to more directly support our investees and our enterprises. I'd also look for ways to embed impact incentives. At Kiva, we have kind of a soft approach here. If we think that organizations are having stronger impact, they can be eligible for receiving lower fees for financing their loans. Some sort of incentive there that you can receive a better financing deal if you have more impact evidence. I've been really fascinated by the kind of outcomes-based financing, impact-linked financing momentum that's been happening. For those that are interested, you can kind of Google pay for success models and outcomes-based financing models. The idea that an enterprise receives an additional financial bonus if they meet their outcome goal really makes a lot of sense. It ties impact and finance together in a really strong way. And just get creative. I'd love to hear if anybody else knows how investors have kind of strengthened incentives for impact evidence and what that looks like. Lastly, I'd say reach out to researchers and look at kind of ways that you can share what you've learned with your investees. I talk about researchers because there are so many master's students, PhD students, economics programs around the world that are hungry to work with you, that really want to understand what your business is about and learn what your social impact is, whether it's in clean energy or environment. So how can we make that, how can we facilitate those introductions? Can we connect social enterprises with researchers? Can we co-apply for grant funding when that comes? And I think we've had some success at Kiva. One example of this is the United Nations in East and South Asia had a call for proposal. They wanted to learn more about evidence in financial solutions for women entrepreneurs. We co-applied for a grant with 3 of our other financial service providers in Fiji, Samoa, and Cambodia, and we're able to collect data with their customers, learn about it, learn what kind of needs they had, what innovations that were required to better serve those populations. And we were able to put out a great report on that came out earlier this year. So how can we kind of recreate this as well? So with that, I'd love to open it up for some questions or comments. To leave you with some thoughts for today, it's that really the impact evidence that we're seeing coming through the pipeline for the organizations that are looking for impact investing support are not really meeting the mark on impact evidence. And that's okay, because impact is a journey, but we all need to kind of do our part to narrow that gap. And I'd love to hear from you all on what you've learned works best. With that, I'd like to just kind of answer a few questions. Okay, I'm going to just review a couple questions that have come in. Looks like one question from Chris. It says, how do you bring together different impact measures into a coherent narrative when reporting to trustees? Yeah, I think we've certainly seen this from an investor point of view. If you're working with organizations that are reporting about clean energy, and they're talking about financial inclusion, there's so much different metrics out there. It's hard to have one number that illustrates your impact, which is why I think a lot of impact investors just result to the number of people that they've served. But I would say, it's without knowing more details around what this question is, I would say, focus really on what outcome you're most dedicated in affecting. So if it's improving incomes, if it's improving financial resilience, if it's improving crop yields, lead with that outcome change, and tie it with the 5 dimensions of impact is another recommendation here. If you guys aren't familiar with that, there's really focusing on who you're serving. So tying that narrative with who your population is, what your outcome goal is, what your impact evidence is, and how that company and how your organization is really attributing that outcome change is. And then also how you're mitigating any sort of potential risks. So I think that can be a helpful frame. The 5 dimensions of impact can also be really helpful. The second question is, am I seeing an upswing in impact investors' staff roles to do IMM? It can't all be on the shoulders of social enterprises and nonprofits. Yeah, that I am seeing an increase in impact roles across the sector. I think a lot of them are also bucketed into kind of ESG roles, as well, or just in general kind of impact strategy, either from corporate social responsibility arms or from mainstream investors. I have been seeing more roles kind of focus on impact measurement, but I would say that I'm still seeing the roles descriptions being more around collecting of like kind of proxy data. So it's not the skills that they're looking for aren't for somebody to do into detailed studies with social enterprises. It's more of a reporting role. So how do you collect data from social enterprises and kind of illustrate and visualize it to make sense in the impact investing space? I totally agree that it shouldn't be all on the shoulders of social enterprises and nonprofits. That one chart I had with the overlapping circles, it's certainly investors benefit tremendously from better quality data and need to have more skin in the game. Where I have seen it be successful is when impact investors have launched specific technical assistance funds. Incofin recently launched like a $4 million technical assistance fund. A lot of it focused on increasing impact measurement. Amazing example of that. And so if you see anybody with a technical assistance fund, definitely they're on the right path and have a lot more capacity to go deep in impact measurement.
Spencer, we have Razak Ali raising his hand. Maybe
Sure.
we can let him talk.
Sure.
I'm allowing to talk. Are you able to ask your
Hi,
question?
Spencer, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Razak. I'm actually talking from Manchester. I'm a PhD student. I'm a PhD student focusing on how impact investment can promote gender equality through financial inclusion. So what you're saying resonates with me. I really appreciate what you're doing, because it's not most times when you go to impact investing and forums like this, you hear different things other than microfinance and related issues. You hear more of renewable energies and the rest. So this is really encouraging for me. So I don't know, it's like a request. Is there any way I can connect with you personally so I can further engage you on my research?
Yes, you can reach out to me on email as well. For those that I can put it up on my slide, but it's spencerm@kiva.org. Feel free to send me an email.
Okay. There's a question I want to ask. So, one of the areas I'm looking at is managing relationship between stakeholders in the impact investment ecosystem. So I noticed in my research, I noticed most times when people talk about stakeholders, there's always focus on the impact investors, not focusing on the investee. So there's this mindset that once the fund is available, it's okay, not minding what the people really want. So in a situation like that, how do we give the investee voice to talk in situations like that, so that there has to be like a match between what you're trying to do and what the people actually want? I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. You're saying like reports and focus in the sector is more on, how do we get more impact investors involved, or what are their needs? How do we encourage more capital? Whereas it should be flipped. It's more, let's hear directly from our investees. Let's hear directly from their stakeholders, their customers, their supply chain. Yeah, I think, and that's a common issue I've seen, and really it's all about one is just continuing to raise awareness and challenge impact investors when they talk about impact to say, well, tell us about a few of your investees. We want to hear about them. What is the impact they're having? When we look at annual reports, I think that there absolutely needs to be more focus on investees and the impact data that they're having. But also having more forums where we can hear directly from investees, I think is important. I have some other kind of like pie in the sky ideas. I think that regulation may help this, as well as more impact certification. So essentially, if you're an investor that is not understanding the end stakeholder benefits of your investees, then you have to be put in a different kind of category as an investor. You might be more of a thematic investor. So you make general investments in clean energy or financial inclusion, but that's kind of all you can really say. If you really want to be an impact first investor, you need to support investees and need to kind of highlight them throughout your process. So I support kind of reclassification around intention.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Great, there's a lot of awesome questions here. There's a See, another question is, how have impact measurement factors evolved in the past few years? What's being measured now that wasn't being measured before? Especially as labels like MFIs have brought into impact investing projects. What has changed in terms of what entities are approved with borrowers at Kiva? So this is a little bit of a mix of a Kiva specific question as well as just a general question. I would say one is that we're seeing positive growth in impact measurement evidence. So that gap I talked about, 60% of companies still don't have quality impact data. That has narrowed in the last kind of 3 years. And so if you look at a typical microfinance institution, they might be reporting on the number of loans they've made to women in rural areas and to farmers, kind of the end, and then what their repayment data is. We're now seeing more and more financial service providers, so microfinance companies, fintech lenders, now starting to say, we've made these loans and we're starting to understand what needs our borrowers have, particularly as some of our partners have started to make loans to refugee borrowers, understanding kind of the issues around getting a national ID, having a kind of permanent home. So we've seen more needs assessments done, and then also more organizations starting to talk more about outcome change. So being able to report on the percentage of their customers that reported being able to increase their income because of their loan, or feeling more financially resilient if there was like a big financial shock that would hit them in the next 30 days. Could they overcome that shock? So I think it's starting to change, which is promising, but there needs to be more support. In terms of Kiva.org, yeah, that is a great call out. Kiva.org started as just a microfinance focused institution. So you take your $25, you find someone who wants to start a small business. If they need a cow for $500, you support that. Kiva has broadened since that origin. I'm really excited that we've now brought into support social enterprises that are addressing clean energy, that are addressing water and sanitation. We recently made a $300,000 loan to a company called Drinkwell in Bangladesh to support their growth of water ATMs as a sustainable business that also creates kind of clean water for communities. Yeah, so Kiva certainly has changed to broaden into many other sectors as well. So a great question of what kind of incentives can be proposed to communities that are benefiting from social enterprise services so that they can provide data to evaluate impact. Yeah, that's a great question around getting kind of response rates from your community members. I think first starting with just we want to learn more about improving our products and services, kind of a generic kind of introduction. Obviously, building trust is really important, but you might get something like a 10 to 15% response rate just on that type of framing alone. Like, we just want to hear back from you. There is some interesting innovations. There's actually a company called Pocket, P-O-K-E-T, that allows people that are responding to surveys on their app to then get either like mobile money transfers or airtime transfers, or be involved in some sort of raffle. I kind of like that dynamic as well. How can we also just say, hey, we recognize this takes time to respond to our questions. If you respond, you're eligible for some sort of raffle, or we can just have a fixed kind of incentive. You can increase response rates that way. I also heard this question about participatory learning, where your end beneficiaries are engaged in the process for defining how learning impact is measured and understood. This is excellent. Our view on this dynamic is it should be encouraged. I would say, as an impact investor, we often feel like we're one level above where that participatory learning can occur. So really, it's about supporting our institutions and our investees with asking if they are using this practice and how we can support, and by providing resources or some financing to support that practice. But related to that, I think it's really key to, if you're collecting data from your stakeholders, it feels very extractive. You're asking them to share their very personal stories, and then you're taking that data and then demonstrating your evidence to, outside investees. How can you then report back to those stakeholders what you've learned as an organization? I think that is really essential and needs to be practiced more. For example, we conducted a study in Naivasha, Kenya, interviewing 600 dairy farmers. And we learned through these interviews that a particular type of dairy farming practice was much more profitable than other practices. And also we were able to demonstrate that certain types of feeds were much better at producing milk yields. How do we then take that information and report it back? So we're able to report back out our findings to the dairy cooperative to then share with their members as well. So making sure that that data is also useful back to the stakeholders where you're acquiring that information. There's a question that says, it sounds like I have a preference for quantitative data over qualitative data. I believe there are, I believe you need both. And so that's a good question to clarify. You need to have the story and the data together. If you just have one report that says, I'll give you an example. We recently received a report that said, like 30% of this company's clients said that their incomes didn't change after receiving financing. So with just that data point, there's no why, there's no how, it's just a number, and we're not sure what to do with it. If you follow that up with qualitative data, such as in key stakeholder interviews, maybe a video interview, maybe jotting down what the story was of why did you not feel like your income changed? Maybe after you bought your asset with the loan, like a cow, the cow might have died of a disease. You didn't have livestock insurance, so you were unable to increase your income. We need that story. We need that qualitative data to understand why we see the quantitative results, and then what actions we need to take in order to improve those quantitative results. I focus on quantitative particularly because it gives us a validation. It's a more trusting number rather than say, it's more a representative sample. So I don't think you should just do quantitative, but if a company says, we'd like to receive financing, we're an impact-focused company, and we've done 10 interviews with our customers, and they all say that things are going great, that feels less sure than something that says, hey, we interviewed 250 customers, 95% of them said that their quality of life improved. So I think you definitely need both, but without any quantitative data, it's hard to determine what the truth is. A lot of great questions here. I just want to thank everybody for the participation and joining and comments as well. I see Caroline, you have a raised hand. Lorena, is it possible to unmute
Yes.
Caroline?
No, sorry, it was a mistake, but but I'm happy to ask a question if needed. But no, so actually, I had a question on.
Oh, sorry, Caroline, we cannot hear you.
Okay. Caroline, feel free to type it in the chat.
Yeah.
Sorry, your internet has cut out. A couple other questions here. In terms of a group working on training for impact measurement and practitioners, there's a couple really great classes I suggest. One is there's a class on Coursera called Impact Measurement and Management for the SDGs. This is an awesome class. I'll put it in the link. That you can, after you complete the class, you can actually have a badge in your LinkedIn profile. It's awesome. I strongly recommend everyone takes that course. If you want to learn more about kind of quasi-experimental and experimental methods. I would say look at the MIT and JPAL course on evaluating social programs. Let's see, I think I have it. Yeah, take a look at this link here I put in the chat. That really goes deep in kind of this counterfactual methodology. But other than that, I mean, yeah, I mean, you can get a master's degree in impact evaluation, or you can just take some of these classes and get kind of additional badges on your LinkedIn as well. Let's see, a couple other questions. Yeah, there are a lot of tools out there as well, but I'd start with those. Let's see, another question is, can you share more about what you mean about thoughtfulness and A/B testing, or what the kind of do's and don'ts of A/B testing? What mistakes should we avoid? So when I say A/B testing, I basically mean randomly having some customers receive your product and others don't. So say your social enterprise is focusing on helping with business training programs. What you could do is you could say, who's interested in this market of small business providers, who's interested in receiving business training programs. So you'd get an opt-in list of participants, say it's like 5,000. And then you would basically randomly have 2,500 receive your business training programs, and 2,500 say, oh, sorry, we don't have any room for you. Now, when I say thoughtfulness, is that ethical? Does it make people uncomfortable that they were randomly denied a business training program? So you have to be careful around how you design this. One of the methods I prefer is called like a phase-in technique, where what you can do is you can provide the business training program for one group of participants for maybe 6 months or a year. And then you tell the other group that you will be eligible to receive that training, either 6 months or a year later. So at least you have this kind of time gap so you can compare outcomes before the comparison group starts to receive your training program as well. So that's one example of just being thoughtful of if you are going to do an experiment, you have to kind of be careful around how you design that.
Thank you, Spencer. We have 3 minutes left, so maybe if I can just share something quickly before we close, unless there is any other like very interesting question, pressing question that we can address.
Yeah. No, thank you, Lorena, and thank you for everyone that joined and participated. Again, you can reach me also on LinkedIn, Spencer McCall, Kiva, and happy to try and support any other questions you have.
Perfect. Just let me share something quickly, everyone. I'm sharing my screen. I pasted a couple of links in the chat. We will have another webinar coming soon in January 31st next year. And the idea is that this will be a more actionable kind of webinar. We want it to be more hands-on. And for that, we are referring to our impact strategy app, which I also pasted the link in the chat. This is our app. Some of you already are registered maybe, and some have heard of it in previous webinars. So in January, it's coming. With some improvements. Right now it's in a beta mode, but in January we will have many improvements based on your amazing feedback, everyone who's using it at this point. And with that, we want you to start using it to create your right impact strategy. We want you to have the power to decide what are your outcomes, regardless of what funders or anyone else is asking you to report. What is it that you consider your problem statement and that is important for you to track and for your stakeholders? And then if you do that before the webinar, then this will make much more sense. We will talk about how to align the outcomes with metrics and data points, metrics being the indicators. How am I going to measure this outcome? And data points, where is this data coming from? Do I have it in a spreadsheet, in a survey? How am I getting this information? And finally, we will talk about how to bring all of it together and learn from it and make it useful for all these things that Spencer was talking about, like how am I really helping my stakeholders, what is happening with my business, with my clients, etc. So I hope you can join. And again, the links are there in the chat. We can also share them when we share this recording. You can also find them in our website. And with that, I thank everyone for joining this session. Thank you, Spencer. This was very interesting. And everyone who participated, thank you so much for your excellent questions. And happy holidays. This is the last webinar for the year. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.